So we're now on Daf Yud Gimel and Beis. For Tanya, and now the Gemara is quoting a brisa as a support text to what we discussed on Amud Aleph. And it says in the brisa, "V'viyim kelim mibeis ha'uman." Now, under what circumstances will we allow you to this tircha of transporting vessels from the house of a craftsman on Chol Moed, kigon, in a situation of kad mibeis hakador, the kos mibeis hazagog. So the kador is a person who creates what's the word I'm looking for? Pottery. And a zagog is a glassmaker. And you're allowed to take, in those particular cases, the items that you need for yontif. Like, for example, a pitcher to drink from or a goblet to drink from. Avalot semer mibeis hatzava. Well, let's say you have a professional dyer, D-Y-E-R, and he dyes your wool, and now you want to pick it up from the dyer's house. You're not allowed to do so because it's not Sarchei HaMoed. It's not like the case where you get a goblet or a pitcher that you need to drink from on Yontif or on Chol HaMoed. Or in general, you're not allowed to pick up vessels from the craftsman's house on Chol HaMoed because there's no Tzarech HaMoed. It's not like the case of the pitcher. But im ein lo ma yochal, no sein lo scharo menicho etzlo. Now this is interesting because we're getting now into the final stages of schar pa'ula. The craftsman needs to be paid. Why? Because he has no money in the bank. He won't be able to buy his delicacies for yontif. So you're allowed to pay him his wages. But the question is, are you allowed to pick up the object, the vessel that he fixed for you, he repaired for you? No, that you're not allowed to do. Again, I'm assuming you trust him. So menicho etz, we're not going to allow you the extra tircha on Chol Moed to transport the object that was repaired from the house of the craftsman. But in a case where there's a davar avud, he doesn't trust the craftsman. The craftsman might take it for himself or demand payment a second round. We're going to allow you to simply take the object that he repaired for you from the craftsman's house and deposit it in a contiguous house, in the same chatzin. But to allow yourself the tircha of transporting it to a greater distance, that we're not going to allow, because what do we want to achieve? We want to make sure to get the object out of the hands of the craftsman so that he can't cheat you, etc. And that we've done when we transport it to the next door house. Let's say even when you transport it to the other house, you've protected yourself from the possible deceit of the craftsman, but you still might have thieves that'll come in that house. The house is not secure. Or he can bring these vessels in private into his house. But in any event, we see from the brisa that in a case where the Balabayas doesn't trust the Uman, he's allowed to bring the vessels into his house. And that's going to shed a light on the Mishnah Psachim, because in that scenario, we could be making. So Rava says the following, Taratzta Mevin. We had a contradiction regarding the law of transporting vessels from the house of the Uman, and you've resolved that. But Molichin Kasha, what about taking the vessels and depositing them in the hands of the craftsman so that he can do the work on them? And here we have a stira. Why? The Katani, it says in our Mishnah, Ein Mevir, that we're not allowed to bring vessels and deposit them in the house of the craftsman, the Uman Chol Moed, and V'kol Shkein Shein Molichet. And how much more so it's obvious that we're not allowed to bring them from the craftsman, where we expose the entire thing to Rishus Harab people, the spectators. When you take it and deposit it to the craftsman, so the Mishnah Psachim says that you're allowed to take vessels and deposit it in the hands of the craftsman. We're going to have to go back to our original answer that the Mishnah here in Masechet Katan is addressing Chol Moed. The Mishnah Psachim is addressing Yud Daled B'Nisan. Here we have two different oaths. So we have the Isur of Tircha on Chol Moed, and the question of whether it's a Tzorach Yontif with regard to Psachim, Erev Pesach. Mishnah says, Mechapin es haktzios bekash. Ktzios are te'enim. And when you leave te'enim out in the open, and they'll be affected by nature, by rain and so forth, then they may get ruined. And therefore, the Mishnah allows you to collect those figs that you spread out in the field on Chol Moed, because you'll suffer a financial loss if it rains and the te'enim will be ruined. You're also allowed to cover the figs with straw to protect them from the rain, even though you'll be involved in a tircha yisera. But it's davar avud. Moreover, it could be that it's not only davar avud, it's also tzarech hamoed, because he wants to use these figs at his table on Yom Tov. Yehuda Omer, af ma'abin. We're going to see the Gemara about ma'abin, what it means. Ma'abin is lashon av, to make it thick. Mochrei peros ksus v'kelim mochrei b'tzina l'tzarech hamoed. So if you sell fruit, clothing, utensils that can be used for the moed and they're needed for the moed, you're allowed to sell them on Chol Moed. So whatever you need for Tzarchei HaMoed is mutter b'mechira, to do sales, to buy and to sell. You can do it out in the public. It's l'tzarech hamoed. But somehow it has to be evident that it's l'tzarech hamoed. The Mishnah says, "Hatzayodim v'adashoshos ve'hagarosos osim b'tzino l'tzarech hamoed." So tzayodim are trappers. What are the shoshos? The shoshos, he translates it here as grain pounders. Okay, so they're pounding wheat kernels and making it into small grits. All this is called l'tzarech hamoed. However, here the Mishnah adds a condition both in ksus v'kelim with regard to selling them, and sayodim and the shoshos v'agrosos, which are trappers, grain pounders, and bean grinders. All of the above are mutter, but only if it's b'tzina. Obviously, it's a tzarech hamoed, that's condition number one, but it also has to be done in private. So it's Tzarchei HaMoed and it's being done in private. I have to try to remember those two conditions. The Mishnah says, Rabbi Yossi Omer Heim Hechmir al Atzma. Even though you're allowed to sell on Chol Moed, Peiros, Ksus, Bekalim, nevertheless the Mochrim took upon themselves a Chumrah and to abstain from performing these tasks and selling and buying. And why is this? Because it looks to the onlooker that they're engaged in their usual uvda dechol, weekday activities. Therefore, we're going to require that they work in private. Gemara says, Pligi ba Rabbi Chia bar Abba v'Rav Asi. How do we understand the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda and Mishnah? Travayu Mishmei Dechizkiya Rabbi Yochanan Chad Omer Mechapin Aklushi. Ma'abin Asmuchi. Chad Omer Mechapin Bein Aklushi Bein Asmuchi. Ma'avin also Kivin Keri, Kivin Kri. So when it says Machapin, which means you're allowed to cover these figs that are out exposed to the rains, Aklushi means you can take stalks of straw, separate one from the other, and salt them, so to speak, sparsely over the figs. And when it says in the Mishnah Ma'abin, that's referring to Asmuchi, which means that all the stalks of straw are close together and you can make it thick, you can cover them closely. And it means the Tanakama does not permit this task to be performed as it's uvd in the chol, with the straw laid thickly over the figs to block out the rain. The straw may cover the fruit only sparsely, with some space left between the stalks of straw. And that's the sheet of the Tanakama of Yehuda's Bekil, and he permits the straw to be laid out exactly the way he would do it on a weekday, thickly, to block all moisture. The Tanakama is not interested in blocking out all moisture. But nevertheless, it's also because of uvda dechol. But the second interpretation, we don't know if it's Rav Chia or Rav Asi, is that mechapin, meaning that when you talk about covering it, we're not going to make any difference between aklushe and asmuche, whether it's sparsely or closely covered. Ma'abin oso sokimin kri. He can make it thick. That's what it says in the Mishnah. And that's referring to the figs. And you can take a mass of figs and you can form them into one compact pile. And then it'll be easier to cover them. And Tanya Nami Hochima Abin Osa Oso Kimin Kri. And again, it's referring to the figs. And making it thick means that you compact the figs together in one pile, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Again, it was Rabbi Yehuda who was the maker. Let's go back to our Mishnah. It says, Rabbi Yehuda says, Af me'aven. You can make it thick. And according to one Mandi Omar, Rabbi Yehuda's kula of ma'abin is only, just 1 second, is only in the case of asmuchi. And Mechapin is on Klushi. That's one Mandiyom. The other Mandiyom says that Mechapin applies not only to Klushi, but even to Smuchi. And Ma'avin means Oso Kimin Kri. And the second shita of Ma'abin Osin Oso Kimin Kri is supported by the Brisa, which says explicitly Ma'abin Osin Oso Kimin Kri. Mochrei Peres Ksus V'Kelim Mochram B'Tzina. If you're selling fruit, clothing, or utensils, you can do it privately. Litzarach HaMoed. And we spoke about trappers and grain pounders and bean grinders. They also could do their work. B'Tzina for Tzarchei HaMoed. Everything is for Tzarchei HaMoed. Rabbi Yossi was machmir, said that they were machmir upon themselves. Hein hechmiru al atzman delo avi avdi klal. They didn't do any work at all. Dilma avi avdi b'tzina, or they were machmir to do the work in private. In other words, when Rabbi Yossi says that they were machmir al atzman, hein hechmiru al atzman, is he coming to be Mekil on the Tanakama, or is he coming to be Machmer on the Tanakama? If Rabbi Yossi means they were Machmer al-Atzman, they didn't do any work at all, then certainly Rabbi Yossi is being Machmer on the Tanakama. Tanakama allows one to work as long as it's in private. But if, on the other hand, the Chumrah of Rabbi Yossi is to perform the work in private, that indicates that one is not obligated to perform the work privately. That was a chumrah that they took upon themselves to work privately. Whereas the Tanakhama holds that there's an obligation to do the work privately. Okay, so this is where we're going to stop for today. And later on, in Mirz Hashem, we'll finish the Amud here, Daf Yud Gimel on base. So we're going to stop here at Iboilu. And I'll take this opportunity to wish you a great day.